The Independent Nasserite Movement, or simply Al-Mourabitoun, also termed variously Movement as Nasseristes Indépendants in French, Independent Nasserite Organization, or Movement of Independent Nasserists, is a predominantly Sunni Muslim Nasserist political party in Lebanon that is closely allied with Shia organization Hezbollah. Name: initially, the Movement of Independent Nasserists was the name of the political organization, whilst Al-Murabitoun designated the militia forces. However, this distinction between political and military wings became blurred over time. The Sentinels, but also meaning guardians or saviors, carries historical Islamic connotations. Political beliefs. As its name implies, the INM espoused the ideals of the late Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser, a blend of socialism and secular pan-Arab nationalism, expressed on his party slogan, Freedom, Unity, Socialism, being radically opposed to the Christian Maronite-dominated political order in Lebanon. The political goals of Al-Mourabitoun were to preserve the Arab and secular character of Lebanon and, in the long term, establish a socialist political and economic system. The INM presented itself as being pragmatic in ideological terms, however, and that its doctrine was based upon a fusion between materialist Marxist and liberal idealist theories. In 1979, leading party cadre Samir Sabah described the INM as particularly close to the Lebanese Communist Party. Although the INM claimed to be a secular, non-sectarian movement, its membership has always been overwhelmingly Muslim, being perceived within Lebanon as a predominantly Sunni organization. During the movement's resurgence in the early 1970s, it drew its support largely from working classes and impoverished petty bourgeoisie Sunnis, but this did not prevent them of attracting followers from other sects. Indeed, a 1987 report used by the U.S. Library of Congress Study on Lebanon estimated the INM membership since the mid-1970s to be about 45% Sunni, 45% Shia and 10% Druze, although other unconfirmed sources present the remaining 40% as Christians. Geographically, the movement had its epicenter in the Sunni areas of Beirut. History. Origins. Founded in 1957 at Beirut by a group of Lebanese Nasserite activists led by Ibrahim Kouleilat, who opposed the pro-Western policies of President Camille Chamoun. The INM came to prominence at the height of the 1958 Civil War. The movement's own 2,000-strong militia, the Sentinels, or Les Sentinels in French, clashed with the Lebanese army and pro-government Christian militias in northern Lebanon and Beirut. Despite experiencing a temporary decline in the years immediately after the 1958 crisis, the INM remained an active force in Lebanese politics throughout the 1960s and 1970s. At the beginning of the 1970s, the movement re-emerged as a major political faction within the Sunni Muslim community, forging alliances with other anti-establishment leftist parties such as the Progressive Socialist Party led by Kamal Jumblat and the Lebanese Communist Party. In 1969, the INM became a member of the Front for Progressive Parties and National Forces, later reorganized in 1972 as the Lebanese National Movement. Consistent with its pan-Arab ideals, the radical INM was a staunch advocate of the Palestinian cause in Lebanon since the late 1960s, cultivating close political and military ties with the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the immediate pre-war years. 1975–76 Civil War. When the Lebanese Civil War broke out in April 1975, as a member of the Lebanese national movement, the INM, Al-Mourabitoun was an active founder of the LNM's military wing, the Joint Forces. The movement claimed that was the first amongst the Lebanese progressive militias during the war, and by 1977 it was the largest organization within the LNMJF, both in terms of popular support and military capacity. During the 1975–77 phase of the Lebanese Civil War, the Al-Murabitoun militia forces were heavily committed in several battles and suffered considerable casualties, especially at the Battle of the Hotels in October 1975, where they engaged Christian Kataib regulatory forces and Tigers militia fighters, and later at the Spring Offensive held against East Beirut and Mount Lebanon in March 1976. They also took part that same year in the violent sieges of the Christian towns of Es-Saadiyat, Damour and Shia in the Iqlim al-Karab, on the side of PLO and Palestinian Liberation Army units to avenge the earlier Tel al-Zator massacre by the Lebanese Front militias. Military structure and organization, quietly reformed in early 1975. Their Sentinels militia started with just 150 to 200 poorly armed militants, but it subsequently grew to 3,000 men and women drawn from the Muslim quarters of West Beirut, placed under the command of Kulaylat himself, headquartered at Kulaylat's own native Mahallat Abu Sheikh quarter in West Beirut. The INM, Al-Murabitoun, in the early 1980s numbered some 1,000 regular fighters and 2,000 reservists secretly trained by the Palestinian factions and, later by Lieutenant Ahmed al-Khatib's Lebanese Arab Army. Since its foundation, the militia quickly attained a regular outlook, attested by the high discipline and organization of its 3,000 uniformed militiamen onto conventional branches of armor, infantry and artillery, backed by medical, signals and military police support units, whilst Druze, Sunni and Shia Muslims filled the rank and file. Its officer corps was staffed mostly by Sunnis and a few Christians trained in Libya and Iraq. Weapons and equipment. Most of the INM, Al-Murabitoun's own weapons and equipment were provided by the PLO. Libya, Iraq and Syria are pilfered from Lebanese armed forces and internal security forces reserves. Additional weaponry, vehicles and other non-lethal military equipments were procured in the international black market. Armored and transport vehicles. Created in February 1976, the Al-Murabitoun's early armored corps initially fielded two obsolescent Sherman Firefly medium tanks, a few charioteer tanks M113 and Panhard M3 VTT armored personnel carriers M42 Duster SPAAGs, Cadillac Gauge V100 Commando, Panhard AML-90 and Staghound armored cars seized from the Lebanese army, backed by gun trucks. The latter consisted of commandeered U.S. Willys M38A1MD and Kaiser M715 Jeeps, Land Rover Series 23, Toyota Land Cruiser, GMC K25 Sierra, Chevrolet C10 Cheyenne and Chevrolet CA third-generation pickup trucks, fitted with heavy machine guns, recoilless rifles and anti-aircraft autocannons. For logistical support, the INM militia relied on Volkswagen Type 2 transporter pickups, Chevrolet Series 50 light-duty, Dodge 600 medium-duty and GMC C7500 medium-duty cargo trucks. The corps was later expanded in October 1982 following the the departure of PLO regular forces from West Beirut, INM militia forces were able to salvage 10 Soviet-made T-34 85ths medium tanks, 1 MiG-3 MBT captured from the IDF in September 1982, 5 BTR-152 wheeled APCs and even 3 ZSU-23-4 Shilka SPAAG tracked vehicles, artillery. In addition, the seizure of some ex-PLO artillery pieces, namely obsolete Soviet ZIS-257mm and ZIS-376.2mm anti-tank guns, Type 59 to 1130mm field guns, plus 5 BM-11 122mm mounted on Isuzu TW trucks and BM-21 Grad 122mm MBRLs, which allowed them to strengthen their own artillery corps. British Bofors 40mm L-60 anti-aircraft guns, Yugoslav Zastav M55 20mm, Soviet ZPU 14.5mm and Zu-23-223mm AA autocannons were employed in both air defense and direct fire supporting roles. Activities and controversy. Stubborn and determined fighters, adept at employing guerrilla tactics in urban areas, the INM Al-Murabitoun operated mainly within West Beirut, controlling by the mid-1980s the important Mahalat Abu Sheikha, Wadi Abu Jamil, Hamra, Manara, Ashura, Bastar, Shia and Ras Beirut quarters. They also operated 2 clandestine ports located at Uzai district and at the Ain al-Reza waterfront sector of the Lebanese capital, which were used primarily for arms smuggling in collusion with the Sidon-based Popular Nasserite Organization. A third illegal port located at the Karantina dock area in East Beirut was briefly held by the INM since November 1975, until being forced out by the Christian militias in January 1976. The INM also had its own media services. A radio station was set up in 1975, the Voice of Arab Lebanon, or La Voix du Liban Arabe in French, followed in 1982 by a television station, the Television of Arab Lebanon, or Télévision du Liban Arabe in French. The broadcasting facilities being allocated at the Mahalat Abu Sheikha Party headquarters offices. The Syrian military intervention of June 1976, which the INM Al-Mourabitoun initially strongly opposed, even fighting the Syrian army at the Battle of Bamtan in the Chauf district, but gradually came to terms with it, and the slow decline of the movement's political role at the beginning of the 1980s caused their influence within the Sunni community to wane, losing in the end its final base of support amongst the political and intellectual elites. Towards the end of the 1970s, heavy casualties and their involvement in atrocities against non-Muslims caused the number of militants from other sects in the ranks to drop sharply, a situation further aggraved by internal splits that occurred at the early 1980s. This led a significant number of prominent Sunnis, such as the jurist Walid Edo and the activist Amir Sabah, to leave the INM leadership board, to set up their own organizations, and thereby the movement became an exclusively Sunni force. Relations with its Lebanese coalition partners were also strained to the point of the Al-Murabitoun battling rival Nasserite parties such as the Nasserite Correctionist Movement in November 1975 over control of the Karantina district in East Beirut, later fighting the SSNP factions in 1980-81 for the possession of certain West Beirut quarters. Nevertheless, the Al-Murabitoun did not lose its military capabilities, and during the June 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, they helped the PLO in the defense of the southwestern outskirts of the Lebanese capital from IDF attacks until the end of the siege in September of that year. The 1982 Israeli judicial inquiry into events in Beirut estimated that the strength of the Al-Murabitoun in West Beirut was 7,000 fighters. Ibrahim Kulaylat emerged from the wreck of the LNM and the Palestinian withdrawal as the dominant Sunni leader, though he opted not to join the LNRF, Jamal nor the pro-Syrian LNSF alliances in the mid-1980s, and consequently the political influence of the INM, Al-Murabitoun, had waned significantly. The movement initially waged its own guerrilla war at the Beirut area against Israeli forces, but later fought in a more conventional fashion at the 1983-84 Mountain War allied with the Druze PSP, the LCP and SSNP in the Chaouf district against the Christian Lebanese forces and the Lebanese army. This alliance was short-lived, however, and when the War of the Camps broke out in April 1985 at West Beirut, it saw the Al-Murabitoun allied with the PLO, the 6th of February movement and other smaller Nasserite factions pitted against a powerful coalition of PSP, LCP and Shia Amal movement militia forces backed by Syria. Eventually, the Al-Murabitoun was crushed after a week of heavy fighting and ceased to exist as a significant fighting force, thus deprived from its own military wing. The weakened INM went underground again for the remainder of the war and gradually withered away, forcing Ibrahim Kulaylat to flee the country in 1986 to seek asylum in Switzerland. Some remnants of the Al-Murabitoun, however, remained at large in West Beirut, waging a fierce guerrilla war against the Syrian army until February 1987, only to be brutally suppressed in the 1987-88 anti-militia sweeps carried out jointly by Syrian commando troops and the Lebanese internal security forces. The post-war years. After a long period of inactivity throughout the 1990s, the INM finally returned to the spotlight in April 2001, when they announced in a press conference held in Beirut their official comeback to Lebanese domestic politics. In 2006 it reopened offices in Beirut, the north, the Bekaa Valley and the south. The movement is still headed by Ibrahim Kulaylat.